Hi. So in this demo session we are going to discuss about the defect life cycle. What is a defect and how to report the defect, and what are the different terminology used in the while assigning a defect. So in this slide, if there are 5 points mentioned at here: what is bug, what is defect, what is error, what is fault, and what is failure. So what is a bug? A bug is nothing, just when you are validating or verifying an application or any object or anything. So if that object is not as per your expected, so you raised a bug. Same in software terminology. Once our supplied input does based on our supplied input, if application is not displaying the actual result as mentioned in our expected, then we report that as a bug. So due to that bug, application becomes faulty, and due to that fault, that complete application is a failure. So what is defect and what is error? So defect is nothing, once the application is live and an end user find that any mismatch in their expected and actual, then that is known as a defect. And this defect or that bug is raised by human mistakes, so that is called an error. Now, why the bug reporting is necessary? So when we verify our application, we execute a certain set of test cases to verify our application behavior. If we found that the expected is not as per application, whatever the application is displaying at the time of execution, if the actual is not as per the expected behavior of the application, then we must communicate that defect or bug to the creator of that application. So the developer is the creator of that application, developer develops that application. So to convey them, to let them know that this application is not working as per our requirement. So bug reporting is necessary so that a developer can understand, okay, these are some error in the application and we need to fix this defect. Now come to the second point: who can report the bug? In IT industry, a test engineer is only responsible to report the bug. If developer finds any defects, then developer does not report that bug. He tries to fix that defect in his environment, and once the software test engineer tests that application, verify that application, and he finds that there are some mismatch in actual and expected, then he can only report that defect through any defect tracking tool which is provided by the organization. It may be some defect tracking tool, and it may be through a spreadsheet, MS Excel sheet, that test engineer can report the defect. How to report the bug? This is the very important thing. Once you get a bug, so you should report that bug in such a manner that developer can understand the complete scenario in which steps the tester or test engineer found the defect, and how the developer can reproduce that defect in their environment so that developer can fix that defect. Things must follow while reporting the defect or bug. We will see in our next slide. Now the first thing, what is the defect life cycle? Once the defect is raised, So that starts a new life cycle for that particular defect. So here we can see that once the defect is raised, that first time a test engineer finds a defect, finds any mismatch between actual and expected behavior of the application, so test engineer raised a new defect. So that defect status is a new. After that, he assigns that defect to for supervision. That may be test engineer's lead or senior test engineer. They verifies that yes, that defect raised by the test engineer is a genuine defect, and then supervisor assign that defect to the developer so that developer could fix that defect. Once the defect is assigned to the developer opens that defect in their environment. So here we can see that open state. So in that time, developer put the state as a open and he start working on that. Once he opens the defect, he checks that did a manual test engineer supplied a sufficient information for that particular defect. If developer finds that some information is missing, or due to that he is not able to reproduce that defect in development environment, so he mark as that defect as a invalid and he rejects that defect. And if that supplied information is correct and developer is able to reproduce that defect in their environment, so he marked that test status as a valid and he start working on that. So again you can see here from valid a right arm says deferred. It means if a developer get 5 bugs to fixed, so developer prioritize that which need to be fixed first. Is that a critical defect? Is that a major defect? Is that a cosmetic defect? Based on that severity, he prioritizes that defect and he marks deferred state for those defect which is not fixed by developer in that particular build. Let's an example. Like there are 2 test engineers who are verifying an application. One test engineer report 3 defects, that 3 functional defects, and another test engineer report 2 cosmetic defect or graphical user interface defect. Once the developer start working on that, then developer prioritize all 5 defects, that which defect need to be fixed first. In that scenario, developer prioritize that first we need to fix the functional defect. So he start working on that for fixing the functional defect. And if the time is over or if the duration is over to fix those all 5 defects, he mark those 2 cosmetic or user interface defect as a deferred state, so that he can fix or he will fix that defect once the next build will be released. So developer fixed 3 functional defect, so again he marked that status as a fixed, and again he assigned those 3 defects for the retest. So here we can see that after fix, that defect status become retest. In retest state, test engineer again retest those 3 reported defects. So again he re-execute those 3 failed test cases to check that is that reported defect has been fixed or not. If those 3 defects are fixed, then test engineer mark status as a pass and he closes that defect. And again if he checks that after retesting, if that defect is not fixed, or in 3 defects only 2 defects are fixed, then again he mark as a status fail, and that defect again follow the same rule from the assign. So here we can see that after retest, if that defect is fail, that test engineer again reassign that defect, and again that defect start following this life cycle. It means again developer will open that defect in their environment and start working on that, and again developer, once the developer will fix that defect, again that defects come to the test engineer to retest that one. So this is the complete defect life cycle through which we can know that if an application has 10 defects, then all defects has been fixed, and during defect fixing phase, what are the different status of that particular defect. Now here we can see that the definition of every state. It says that new, when a tester finds a defect first time in application, that status is new. Assign, test engineer report that defect for supervision, that whether this defect is genuine or test engineer could not test that particular field or the application properly, so that he found that defect. So here we can see the all definition for all the state of that defect. Now things which a test engineer should follow while reporting the defect. So in any defect tracking sheet or defect tracking tool, these are some important things which a test engineer should mention. Defect ID. Defect ID is automatically generated by a bug tracking tool. Once the test engineer report the defect and submit or log the defect, that defect tracking tool automatically generated unique defect ID, which a test engineer can report to developer, so that developer can open that defect through that unique defect ID number in defect tracking tool. Defect summary. This is one of the important thing while a test engineer mention or report a defect. Defect summary tells that what a executor or test engineer did not find, what was the expected and what the actual behavior of the application. So in defect summary, this is you can say that it is a brief summary about the defect. In third point, application build version. So this tells that in which version or in which build of the application you found that defect. Why we mentioned this at here? So that developer can understand on which build a test engineer found that defect, so that he can open that build code and could fix that particular defect. In fourth point, status. As we see that in our previous slide, these are the status. So in a status column, if you found that defect first time, then test engineer mentioned here as a new. If a defect is not fixed, then again he reopens that defect. So based on that, a test engineer selects the value for the status of the defect. Severity. Severity tells the developer that what is the effect of that defect in our application. A severity may be high critical, low, major, minor, or cosmetic. Reproducible. Is that defect is reproducible? Sometimes what happens, some defect is randomly generated that cannot be reproduced after following certain steps. So a test engineer mentioned it here. If that defect is reproducible, then he mentioned yes. If that defect is not reproducible, he mentioned no. Defect description. This is one of the most important thing while reporting the defect. Under defect description, we clearly mention what was the expected behavior of the application and what a test engineer found during the execution of the test case. While we report the defect, we must mention on which test data we found the defect. That test data plays a very critical part for reopening that defect on the development environment. Under environment, you should mention if that application you are validating any web-based application and you are not able to open that defect in different version of the browser, like if that defect is you are able to reproduce that defect in IE version 7 and 8 but not able to reproduce on 9, then here you need to mention that this defect is reproducible under IE 7 and 8. And for that particular defect, if you want to give a snapshot so that developer could understand clearly that this is the issue in the application, so you can attach a snapshot of that particular defect. That attachment or that snapshot, either you can capture by defect tracking tool, or you can also supply or attach that snapshot after taking print screen of that particular defect. Here we are seeing a sample bug report through a spreadsheet. So under defect serial number, you can see this is the unique identifier defect ID. Under summary, what I have mentioned, buttons are not identical in shape with respect to other buttons. Summary tells that in our application, all buttons are not in identical shape. Its severity is low because this is the user interface defect. Due to this, there is no failure in functional part of the application. So its severity is low, and since a test engineer found this defect first time, so status is new and the defect category is user interface. Is that reproducible? Yes. And under defect description, we can see for which buttons the application, for which button shape are not identical with respect to other buttons, and how to reproduce that defect, and what would be the expected result and what is the actual result. For defect serial 003, we can see that calculator is not displaying the correct sum. It means there is some functional issue in the calculator. So the severity level of that defect is high, and since a test engineer found this defect first time, so the status is new and the category is functional. Is this reproducible? Yes. And a brief description about the defect: when user sums two odd number, it is not displaying the correct result. It means when user sums two positive number, it is displaying the correct result, but when user sums two odd number, it is not displaying the correct result. and for that the steps to reproduce and expected result and actual result. So this is the complete how to report the defect. Things a test engineer must follow while reporting the defect so that a developer could understand and could able to reopen that defect in their environment and could fix that defect. So this is the complete defect life cycle. Thank you for watching.